Well, hello again. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Invisible College. Now, I wasn't going to do a talk today, but then uh, I was watching TV, I was watching on YouTube, and there was an interview with Dr. Stephen Greer. Now, I'm sure many of you will have heard of him. He's the, uh, as we would say, accident and emergency doctor who now talks about flying saucers, UFOs, as in his disclosure programs. Now, I've not really done too much in that field, I have to admit. It's not really, I've not seen one for myself. And that being so, that's not been a pathway that I've followed. But I am curious, and I am very interested in things like crop circles. And I can't believe that they're all man-made. I just don't think it's possible. When I see the complexity of them and the way, when you sort of look at them close up, at least you can see pictures of them. Very often the corn is woven and together in such a way as to cause shading. And I just don't see, there don't seem to be footprints. They never seem to make a mistake. You know, you don't see a crop circle here. Oh, well, that was a botched one. It didn't work out properly. We'll do another one over here. No, they're one-offs. And I just don't see how it's humanly possible to do these complex images that we see. I'm sure there are human-made ones as well, probably much simpler ones. But some of these are just so incredible. I just don't see how it's possible. But there you go. I mean, what do I know? Anyway, I was watching Dr. Stephen Greer being interviewed, and he was talking about how his quest started, and he had an extraordinary cosmic consciousness experience where he sort of understood, he went into a kind of dimension. I don't like using that word dimension, but a level of consciousness where he could sort of perceive that everything is connected, the whole universe is connected, himself part of it. And the extraordinary thing is that I've been through that myself. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I came into my journey. And you can see parallels perhaps with maybe you've had some of these experiences yourself. But anyway, I thought I'd talk a little bit about my journey because I know a lot of people here are curious as to how I've come to be doing all this work, how it came about, and why I've devoted my life to it. So anyway, I grew up as a very sort of normal young boy and young man, growing up in the suburbs of London. And, I did all the usual things. I was a singer in a pop group at the age of 16. We had our own, I suppose these days you call it tribute band. And I used to be singing all the sort of Rolling Stones and Yardbirds and songs like that, the sort of rhythm and blues type things. And of course, like any normal young man, I was interested in going to pubs, meeting girls, all of those things that you would expect of a young teenager growing up. And then I went to university, and my intention was that I was going to, I was going to read chemistry. In fact, I was going to read chemistry with control engineering, which is, I suppose, would be a useful degree if you're going to operate chemical plants. I was always drawn to science and chemistry in particular. So my A levels were all in maths, physics, and chemistry. And I was hopeless at things like Latin and Greek and German and French. I just couldn't remember the vocabulary. But the way my brain worked was scientific. So I went to university. And on the first day I arrived there, I went to the University of Kent in Canterbury. And at that time, this was a fairly, well, it was a new university. I think we were only about fourth or fifth intake, something like that, at the university, which opened in the 60s. And it was 1968 when I matriculated. So the university was only partly built. You know, it was a building site, parts of it. Other parts were built, like some of the colleges, and I was in Rutherford College, as they called it. And the library, there was a big library building which was half built. I presume it's been finished by now, but it was only half built. And I was walking across the campus on my first day, and just as came to the library and I was walking past it, a voice came into my head and said, "Yeah, you'll be leaving here without a degree." And I thought, what? You know, it's taken me a lot of work and effort to get here. You know, there's no way that I'm going to leave here without a degree. Get that out of your head. What's this? Who's telling me this? Is this my brain going crazy? What's going on here? Anyway, I put that out of my mind, and one of the first lectures in the first term that I had, we had one of our professors came along and he gave us a lecture on the philosophy of science. And, you know, it was a little course on philosophy of science, which I did. And he was talking about the empirical method and how it works. And I think I've mentioned this story before to various people, but I'll repeat it. He gave an example. He said, imagine that a car's going down the road and comes to a corner and it crashes. So the police come out, and they find the man's dead, the driver's dead, nasty accident. So they measure the skid marks on the road, and they can conclude from that the car must have been travelling, really quite fast into that bend, over the speed limit that it should have been doing. So they say, well, the friction of the tyres on the road shows very clearly that the car was going at 65 when it should have been going over maybe 50. And of course the adhesion between the tyre and the road, the friction was not enough to keep that car on the road. Therefore, it spiraled off and crashed. So they write that in their report. And then sort of the blood analysis comes back and reveals that the man had over the level of alcohol in his blood. They said, well, okay, next level, it's clear this man was drunk. That's why, he was going too fast and he crashed. And then they say, well, we'll find out what was going on. So they go to the local pub and they say, oh, yes, there was this man here. He did have a few. We told him not to drive, to get a taxi home, but he wouldn't listen. And, well, what can we do? So they put it down that, the man was drunk. Then someone in the bar says, well, actually, I had a chat with this gentleman, and he seemed very, very depressed. I think he'd had an argument with his wife. So they said, okay, well, so he had an argument with his wife. We'd better go and talk to her. So they went to talk to the wife and said, well, we understand that your husband had an argument with you, and that, he went off and he had too much to drink in the pub, and very unfortunate, that he had this accident. And she said, she burst into this, I know, it's all my fault, He found out that I was having an affair with our next door neighbour, and he was so upset, he just dashed out. It didn't mean anything to me, and I'm so sorry. And so they say, okay, well, now it's because his wife was having an affair. Now, I'm telling you this because it gives you different levels of answer to the same question. Why did that car crash? First level is at the level of material physics, the friction with the road. The second level, relates to the state of the driver. He's got alcohol in his blood, he's not driving properly. Third level is that he'd had a row with his wife. And the fourth level is, what was that row about? It was because she was having an affair. And you can see that all those are true, but they form a kind of nest of answers. And this is kind of how we are with the material world around us. We take out our tape measures and we measure things, and we weigh things, and we deduce things about the laws of physics, for example. We say that the Earth goes around the Sun. You know, it takes 365 and a quarter days to go around, roughly speaking. And there's an attraction between the Sun and the Earth that holds it there in that orbit. We call that attraction gravity. We don't know what gravity is, but we recognize that there is this attractive force. But then you can go up to a higher level and you say, well, the solar system is a kind of organic being itself. Just as we have different organs in our body, we've got heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, the solar system's got various planets. And we don't know why it has all these different planets and what they're doing. We only know our own planet. We know it has life on it and it supports us. And it takes light from the sun and it uses that to store energy in plants, which can then be eaten by animals. We know that. We know all of that. But, you know, basically, what is the cause? Why? We don't know. But then you go to a metaphysical level, and you read in the Bible, it says that God created the universe, you know, and he created everything in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. And that's kind of more like the metaphysical understanding of why everything is here. And that is labeled religion, whereas the physics and mechanics and so on is labeled as science. And somewhere in between that, there's a kind of metaphysics, philosophy, I think you might call it. So I was caught up in this, and it brought to my attention the fact, or the idea, that science wasn't going to give me the answers that somehow inside I was craving. I wanted to know why I'm here, what this world is all about, why we exist at all, and what our purpose is. So I started reading lots of books on philosophy, and I started doing yoga. And I got quite good at it. And then one day in my last year, I went onto the beach, Broadstairs, which is not all that far from Canterbury, where the university was, or still is. And I was sitting on the beach, and I was with two friends, and they were frolicking in the surf. And it was evening, it was night time. And as I sat on the beach, I started meditating, or what I thought, you know, we call meditating, shall we? And suddenly I was overwhelmed by this cosmic experience, that everything in the universe was all connected. It was all one being. And I was part of that being. And I hadn't a clue. Nothing had prepared me for this. The sand in my hands was part of it. I could look, there's the sea lapping and coming in. My friends, they were part of it. Up above, there was the moon visible, and there were stars in the sky, and there were thin clouds. They were all part of it. Everything was all part of the same enormous cosmic being. And it only lasted a few minutes, and then that passed, and it was back to normal reality. But it changed my life. And from that moment onwards, I wanted to know the truth about what I'd experienced. And it started me on a deeper quest, not just reading sort of regular philosophy. I'd read Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and Camus and Sartre, these modern philosophers, and a bit of Plato, and Aristotle. I've been reading the regular philosophers. I now started looking into some Eastern philosophy, things like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, to see if there are answers there. And actually, the nearest thing I found was in the Upanishads, where it talked about the Atman and the Brahman, the Brahman of the universe being the total universal consciousness of everything, and the Atman being the individual, which is like a spark of that greater whole. And I can understand that, because that's exactly how I felt when I was in this cosmic consciousness experience. And that started me on a path, and I was reading more and more and more, and I started traveling, asking questions, looking for answers to this. And needless to say, because I was so distracted by everything that had happened to me over the last several years, I didn't get my degree in chemistry. The prophecy came true. But something else also happened, and that was that my intuition, let's call it that, was opened. And I started receiving guidance of one sort or another. Sometimes, it will come to me actually as words, as someone speaking to me. More often, it's more a sense of I get an intuition that I need to be looking into this, or I need to be looking into that, or have you thought about this in relation to that? And that's kind of how my work has developed. And I've had other strange experiences as well since that first one on the beach. But I'm not going to those at the moment. But this is where this work is coming from. And if I tell you that I'm guided, I don't mean that I'm one of these TV clairvoyants you see who say, well, God told me this, and, I had a little chat with Jesus last night and he told me all this, that, and the other. It's not like that. It's much more a sense that I'm following a pathway and I'm being led along the path. And each of us are taught, if you're a Christian, you're taught this. We certainly are if you're a Catholic. Each of us have a spirit guide, a guardian angel with us, traveling our journey with us. But it can be actually more than one. And actually you can end up with a retinue of specialists in different areas, you could say, and higher grade ones. But you definitely have one who's there always with you to give you certain levels of protection and guidance. If you will call on them, they'll stop bad things coming to you. Because there are also demons in this world. You have to understand that we live in a multi-shelled existence. We're conscious of our physical body and we identify with it. We also have a mind, we have a soul, we have a spirit. These things were understood by the Egyptians, by the way. They talk a lot about it in their work. But we have to understand that we live in these different, it's like Russian dolls, we live in different levels at once. So when you die, it's not that you make this journey, it's more like you wake up on a different level and you leave behind the physical. When you dream, when you're at a different level. So it's more like that. It's more like a kind of awakening to different levels of yourself and to the realities that are to do with those levels. So there is a spirit realm, and yes, your dead relatives are in the spirit realm if they haven't reincarnated. Yes, reincarnation happens as well. Or they may have moved on. They may have moved on to different places. And it's such as why maybe you're not been hearing from them or not being aware of their presence. Very often people will want to stay in touch with their family. But anyway, that's a different subject entirely from what we're talking about. But what I'm trying to do with these programs is present evidence that makes sense. I don't want to talk airy-fairy. I don't want to talk, well, I'm clairvoyant and they told me this and so it must be right. I'm not a channel like that. I look for evidence. I'm still a scientist at heart. I look for evidence, and I look for what other people have known in the past and what other paradigms are. For example, we're taught one kind of astrophysics. If you read any textbooks on physics, they all start off with Einstein's theory of relativity, and they talk about, how time changes, and you can go backwards in time by traveling faster than light, or you can't go faster than light because it's a limiting speed. And they talk all, that this is their paradigm, and everything has to relate into that. And so then they invent concepts like black holes and dark energy and dark matter. You can't see or measure and know these things. Anyway, they're so far away, at the center of the galaxy or whatever, that you're never going to get in touch. So it can't be proved or disproved, which is very useful to the scientists. But there is an alternative paradigm, which we will discuss at a later date, which is the electric universe paradigm, which talks about the electric force and how the electric force is what actually drives the physical universe, not gravity and big bangs and dark matter and all these phlogiston ideas which make up modern physics or astrophysics. Phlogiston, by the way, the phlogiston idea, if you didn't do any chemistry, they believed, I think it's in the 18th century, up until the sort of late 18th century, that when something burnt, right, let's say a piece of paper burnt, the fire in it was actually came from something called phlogiston. Yeah, funny name. I don't know why they chose that name. I expect it's Greek. And then you're left with the ash, and they would call that dephlogisticated matter. And it took a very clever Frenchman called Lavoisier to prove that there was no such thing as phlogiston, that what was happening was that the oxygen in the air was burning, releasing the carbon or whatever in the material, and that the ash was the oxide of what was left, and there were various gases given off. And that's the basis of our modern chemistry. And poor old Lavoisier, a very clever man, and he, unfortunately, because he was an aristocrat, he had his head chopped off in the French Revolution. So perhaps French chemistry would be even further along than it is now, but had he survived. So hats off to Lavoisier, great man. So I want us to understand that just because you've been taught one paradigm, and in this case we're talking about the paradigm of Einsteinian astrophysics, doesn't mean that's the only paradigm. A paradigm is a complete worldview of interlinked theories. It's not just one theory, it's interlinked theories that make up a worldview. And what I'm going to be presenting, let's use that word. What I'm going to be presenting in this series of lectures, and I've already started, is a different paradigm, one which is more inclusive of other levels of being, but is still something which is your mind can handle and deal with. That's because that's the big problem with religion, as it's taught today, is that it's using a sort of medieval paradigm to deal in the present tense, in our present world, which has moved on from the medieval period. And therefore, large numbers of people, perhaps the majority of people, certainly in the advanced Western world, have rejected religion. They say it doesn't fit with science, it must be nonsense. Because the paradigm, the overall paradigm hasn't moved with it. And so we're left with this kind of medieval version of religion, and all it has left, because it can't it can't deal with modern concepts and physics and the way that we understand things now, it falls back on emotion. And so unless you're an emotionally based person, you probably don't really have much to do with church or ideas of religion. There's nothing there intellectual there to satisfy you if you're an intellectual person. And there isn't much that's kind of physical there either. If you're a physical based person, we don't really have people who flagellate themselves or starve themselves or things with the physical body like the sort of fakirs and the yogis do in India. All that sort of monk stuff, which used to go on, and would actually people who were challenging their body to develop themselves, that's all gone. It's all very soft, gentle religion now. Don't even have to kneel down if you don't want to. You don't have to. When I was a boy, if you wanted to go to communion, say, you had to have been fasting since midnight the night before. So if it was 8 o'clock in the morning, you hadn't eaten anything for breakfast. You'd rush to church. I went through a phase where I kept fainting. Now, of course, you've had your breakfast 2 minutes earlier. Nobody cares, stick the host down, it'll go into your stomach full of other stuff. Who cares? So this is the difference. We still have the medieval view. It's not adapting well to the modern world. And we need to wake up to a better paradigm. And that's going to come even more so when I believe that we're at the end of the age and that we're going to see the return of Jesus Christ before very long. But I wouldn't like to speculate too much when that's going to happen or exactly how it's going to happen. But when it does, we need to be ready for a major paradigm change on this planet. So anyway, I thought I'd throw in this little aside lecture. I don't know what you make of it. Maybe you think this guy's completely nuts. I'm sorry I've been listening to him. Or maybe you think, well, actually, that makes a lot of sense. But it will make more sense as we progress with the various lectures I'm going to be giving on many different subject areas. So thank you very much for your time and your patience. And before you go, please subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. We're up to 700, but we need to get to 1,000. I need another 300 people to subscribe. So if you could subscribe and get your friends to subscribe, it doesn't cost you a cent. Just subscribe, and then press the little bell and the button. You know how it's done. Then we'll get to 1,000, and then YouTube will start taking the channel more seriously. And for those of you who wish to take things further, you can become an associate member of the college, which will get you onto the mailing list. And that means that we'll stay in touch. If YouTube suddenly decide one day, oh, we don't like that guy, let's get rid of him, as they seem to do quite arbitrarily with some people, we'll still be in touch. But you can go further, and you can actually join the college, become a patron, which doesn't cost very much. I think it's £5 a month for the basic membership. And then there will be lectures that you will get, there will be newsletters that you'll get, other information that you'll get. And we're going to develop this thing further to the point where in due course we will have live chats. I haven't worked out how to do that yet. Bear in mind, I'm an old man in his 70s now, and I'm having to learn all this new technology. If I were in my 20s, it'd probably come like that, but these days sometimes I find it hard to remember what day it is. But anyway, so please, if you can afford it, and I know some people can't and it's difficult. Yeah, I know, these are difficult times. Many people can't afford it. But if you can, please join, because then you're helping the college and you're helping the work to go along. It's not exactly just a quid pro quo. It's a sense that we're doing the work together, and that's the way that you can help me best, by becoming members. And you'll get a lot of other information that way as well. So thank you very much, and we'll speak again. Take care.